Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jason Cockrum. I am the Community Engagement Manager for DZone, a technology advice media brand, and I am so excited to be here today representing technology advice and our partnership with Bitsight. Today, we're going to be hearing from Jacob Olcott, the Vice President of Communications and Government Affairs at Bitsight, about the importance of independent benchmarking in shaping a robust cybersecurity strategy. As most of us probably know, there are quite a few changes happening in the cybersecurity landscape with new regulations and compliance regulations emerging almost daily, it seems like sometimes. And in this environment, maintaining confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our most critical assets can be a challenge. And that's exactly what Jacob is going to talk to us about today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jacob. And Jacob, take it away.
Jason, thanks so much. Appreciate you, and thanks for all of you for showing up. Yes, my name is Jake Olcott. I'm Vice President of Government Affairs at Bitsight, and for the next 30 minutes or so, I'll be sharing some thoughts and perspectives on, some of these major shifts in cybersecurity, what I'm calling the new era of cybersecurity transparency, and whether it's new SEC regulations requiring cybersecurity disclosure to the increased demands from our business partners. Companies of all types, all sectors, all sizes are really having to be much more transparent about their cybersecurity programs. And during today's conversation, we're going to be discussing, how you as a security leader can play a critical role in communicating your organization's cybersecurity story, as it were, in an effective way that's going to create trust and confidence with your stakeholders. Because ultimately, navigating this new era of cybersecurity transparency requires you, as a security leader, to implement a strong cybersecurity program, but also to share information about the effectiveness of your program with a variety of different folks, from your executives and management and board to external business partners, investors, insurers, and regulators. So we're going to spend some time today going through some examples of organizations that are doing that well, including the metrics that they're using. We're going to talk about the role of independent benchmarking, which a lot of organizations are leveraging in order to communicate information about their programs. And you're going to hear from stakeholders about how they think about these cybersecurity disclosures and what disclosures they really value. So my hope is at the end of this, you're going to be able to confidently tell your story to the market, regardless of where your company sits, what sector you're in, or what size company you are. So my quick background, I'm an attorney by training, but what I'm about to convey to you is not legal advice. My presentation is based on years of experience that I have working with companies like yours that are trying to communicate critical information about their cybersecurity programs with a lot of different stakeholders. Many of which may not be technologically savvy. I'm sure that you would all agree that that's a really important part of the job. It's growing to be very important, how we explain what we're doing and how we're doing it in a way that is not confusing to your audience. So I've spent a lot of time working on this area of disclosure and transparency. Prior to Bitsight, I served as a legal advisor on cybersecurity, legal and policy issues in the House of Representatives and the Senate. And during that time, I was deeply involved working with the SEC on their initial 2011 guidance to public companies regarding cybersecurity disclosure. So it's a topic I've spent a lot of time on, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of those insights with you today. I did mention what I'm about to say is not legal advice. That's why you have a general counsel for your company, but I hope that you'll find something useful in what I'm about to say, regardless of whether it is legal advice or not. So let's go ahead and begin. And to set the stage, I want to suggest to you that this is a critical moment for cybersecurity leaders. I think that we are experiencing a trust deficit right now in the global marketplace when it comes to cybersecurity. And I think recent events will likely exacerbate this deficit. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that there's a growing lack of confidence in organizations and their ability to adequately address cybersecurity issues. And that trust gap exists across the market, no matter the company, regardless of the size of the company, the sector that the company is in. I think everybody is impacted. And I think that the events in recent months have really been very damaging when it comes to public trust and confidence in what we're doing. And the events that I'm specifically speaking about are a few. As you're all aware, over the last few months, there have been a few very significant attacks on public companies, including MGM and Clorox and Caesars. And these attacks were so significant that they actually received a lot of attention from folks like Jim Cramer, who reported on their financial impact and share price drops. And there are a lot of stakeholders, a lot of shareholders that are observing the kind of material impact that these incidents can have on market price. And so they're very concerned about that. And then the other event that I'm speaking about is the SEC's SolarWinds lawsuit. The SEC alleges that SolarWinds overstated its cybersecurity practices and understated or failed to disclose known risks in its corporate filings. I know that this lawsuit has raised a lot of very significant questions and issues within the security community. And a lot of you are probably concerned about the impact that this lawsuit is going to have on the profession and on your own personal liability and other things. And I think all of those things are completely valid. What I'm talking about today is the impact that a lawsuit like this has on the investor and shareholder community and beyond. And what I can tell you is that the investor community and the shareholder community is looking at the allegations in this lawsuit, and they're very concerned about how they can trust companies and their disclosures, particularly given some of the allegedly egregious behavior discussed in this lawsuit. And I think that probably a lot of you have looked at this lawsuit and you've wondered about the business partners that you're working with and whether they are also potentially misleading you as well. And so I think in a lot of respects, now is a really good time for us to be having this conversation. Now is the time that we really need to think about creating more trust and confidence in our programs, both internally for our CEOs and our boards, but also externally for the stakeholders that matter, like our business partners, our shareholders, our investors, our regulators, insurers, and others. So it's really important that we realize that our goal as cybersecurity leaders is not just to protect the networks and the data day in and day out, but also to explain and demonstrate to our stakeholders that what we're doing is effective and it's working, and communicate that story effectively to those stakeholders. And so that's really what we want to focus on today. So I want to start with some data to help prove this point. We know that cybersecurity is a critical part of doing business in 2023 and beyond. We know that this is going to continue to be a major issue moving forward. There was a question asked by Gartner in a study that they did recently about business to business interactions. And the question was, how often do the organization's customers express concern about or interest in the organization's information or cybersecurity program? And 56% of respondents said that cybersecurity is always or often a point of concern. Now, I think this is really important because it shows that your customers and business partners are really focusing on cybersecurity, and your ability to tell a strong story about cybersecurity is a critical part of winning business. And let's just keep in mind, this isn't just about big companies or small companies. Everyone, regardless of the size of your company or the industry that you're in, has to demonstrate strong cybersecurity. Recent studies from Bitsight further confirm this. Bitsight asked business decision makers like CEOs and CFOs whether cybersecurity is important to the way that their firm makes decisions. And 82% of those surveyed said, yes, cybersecurity is important in the B2B decision-making process. And when we followed up on that with the question, has your organization ever experienced a situation where you've lost business because of cybersecurity issues? nearly 2 out of 5, 38%, acknowledged that their real or perceived cybersecurity issues have resulted in lost business. And that's really important to highlight too, that it's not just companies that have experienced incidents that lose business. It's actually the companies who can't tell good stories about their cybersecurity programs that lose business too. That's what perceived lack of security means. So we're really starting to get the sense that cybersecurity is an important part of the success of a B2B relationship. And then the SEC regulations took hold. So by now, you know the story about the SEC regulations. They were passed in July of this year. They primarily impact publicly traded companies, the largest of companies. And they require public companies to disclose three main things. The first is the process that a company takes to manage cyber risk. The second is the board and management's role in overseeing cyber risk. And the third is material incidents as they arise. And this regulation is going into effect in December of 2023. Now, the SEC specifically states that the reason why they passed this regulation is because of a concern over transparency and disclosure in SEC filings. In other words, having reviewed the disclosures of publicly traded companies over nearly a decade, the SEC found them to be lacking, and they thought that shareholders needed more information from companies about cyber risk. And this regulation is really about requiring companies to disclose information about their cybersecurity programs in annual filings, which are known as the 10K, but also 8K filings, which are made when a company experiences a material incident and they have to notify the market of that. So this is a really important example of a new regulatory requirement around disclosing information to the market and the importance of being transparent about your cybersecurity program. I really think we're going to see more and more of these types of regulations in the years ahead, not just affecting public companies, but affecting other companies. And that's why, regardless of the size of your company or what sector you're in, I think it's never been more important for you to focus on telling your story, your cybersecurity story effectively. And that's really what we're talking about. So when we think about telling an effective story about your cybersecurity program, whether it's to, your external stakeholders, shareholders, et cetera, let's start by thinking about this pretty broadly. Before we get into the what should we talk about, let's talk about where to tell your story. Where are the different places that our company communicates things to the marketplace? And what you're going to realize is that there are many different types of reports that companies use to disclose information. Now, I'm specifically focusing on reports here that public companies use, but I'd love for you to think about the reports that your organization uses and that you may leverage as well. So companies generally use a variety of different types of reports, including a 10K, it's an annual report, a sustainability report, an environmental social governance report, a proxy report, and even a standalone cybersecurity report, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So when you are working on your cybersecurity transparency or your cybersecurity disclosure strategy and story, I want you to make sure that you're looking at all these different types of reports that your company is producing. I want you to make sure that you're thinking about how to use each one of these reports to communicate that story effectively. Now, I've given this presentation a few times, and I recently decided to add one more thing, and that thing is other public statements, like the security statements on your website. So I know that some of you, maybe many of you, have a trust center or a security statement that's available on your website. For some of you, this is the way that you would communicate information about your cybersecurity program to business partners or customers or other external stakeholders. And it may include things like your SOC 2s, et cetera. And it's really important that you think deeply about what you're communicating on these websites, because what you say in these documents and on these websites is becoming extremely important, and it could actually even carry legal liability if your story is inaccurate. Because according to the SEC's lawsuit against SolarWinds made materially false and misleading statements related to their cybersecurity practices on a bunch of different types of public disclosures, including its SEC filings, but also on its website. So statements that purported to describe the company's cybersecurity practices and policies included the SolarWinds security statement that was posted to the website throughout the period that the SEC was assessing them. So I want you to make sure that you're thinking about all of the different public statements that you're making when it comes to cybersecurity. And what I would argue is that this is a really important reminder that telling your story about cybersecurity has to be accurate. We can't just make stuff up. Now, when it comes to telling an effective story, I think that there are a couple of essential elements that you have to keep in mind. Now, this is taken, from the SEC regulation, and the SEC's regulation says that there are two main things that have to be in your disclosure if you're a public company. You have to talk about the role of management and the board, and you have to talk about your risk management approach. Now, the SEC isn't very prescriptive about what exactly to include here. And so in a moment, I'm going to share with you a bunch of examples of how organizations are currently disclosing information on these topics. But before we do, there's two more things that I want you to keep in mind when you tell your story and to tell an effective story. The first is that it's really important that you include measurements of effectiveness. This is not an SEC mandate per se, but you're going to see why it's so important to include metrics in your various disclosures. The main reason is that it gives a lot of meat to your disclosure. It helps your external stakeholders understand exactly what you're doing, how effectively you're doing it, and it gives those stakeholders a chance to evaluate your performance over time. And when you think about it, that's exactly what we're all being asked to do regularly in our jobs, to track performance, to track KPIs, to track metrics. And that's exactly the kind of thing that external stakeholders want to see from us as well. And the second thing that the SEC tells companies, and I just want you to keep this in mind too, is that you shouldn't use boilerplate when telling your story. It's really important to craft your own narrative and don't use standard language copied and pasted from everyone else. And that's particularly true for the 10K disclosure, but I would suggest that increasingly organizations, your stakeholders, they don't just want to see something that looks like it's been lifted from somebody else. They really want to see your unique story and your ability to articulate that. Okay, so now that we know that we need to be thinking about telling our story in a variety of different ways in a variety of different reports, and we kind of have an idea about the high-level categories that we want to touch on, we can dive a little bit deeper into the substance. And to do that, I wanted to give a few real-world examples. I want to begin by sharing with you some statistics of disclosures of Fortune 100 companies. And this is from a review by the EY Center for Board Matters in 2022. I think that we can expect to see a lot of changes in disclosures over the next year and years as a result of the SEC regulations. I realize that some of you on the call are not necessarily coming from public companies. I think that's fine. I just think it's important for you to see, even if you're not a public company, that these are sort of becoming the best practices when it comes to disclosure and transparency. So anyway, let's just kind of tick through them here. 99% of organizations referenced efforts to mitigate cyber risk, such as the establishment of processes, procedures, and systems. And you can see here that what this is providing is from last year, and then they compared it to the previous year. So that's up 6% from the previous year. 66% talked about their response readiness, which included planning and disaster recovery or business continuity issues. 51% said that The company maintains a level of cybersecurity insurance. That was up significantly. So that's something that seems to be changing a lot. 45% disclosed the use of training and education efforts to mitigate cyber risk. That's also up significantly from the previous year. 28% talked about using an external independent advisor. That was up 13%. 18% talked about their alignment with an external framework or standard. That was up 15%. And then the last one, 9% stated that their preparedness efforts included simulations or tabletop exercises. And so that was up a couple percent. So these are all types of information that I think that you should consider including as part of your telling your company's cybersecurity story across, sort of the various reporting parts. And again, different companies are taking different approaches to each of these, but the important thing is that they're describing some of the essentials of what they're doing. So now I just want to move forward and share with you some statistics of disclosures of Fortune 100 companies that is specifically about board oversight. And so you'll remember that this is the second major issue that the SEC talked about, that public companies should include in their disclosures. And again, I think this is important, even if you're not a public company, because increasingly how an organization's board is involved with cyber oversight is becoming very important. It's a really good sort of cultural indicator, and important for oversight purposes. So I think it's important for you to at least think about, sharing how your organization is doing some of these things. And so again, we'll just kind of tick through them, briefly. So 88% of the Fortune 100 companies disclosed that at least one board level committee was responsible for overseeing cybersecurity. 61% disclosed cybersecurity as an area of expertise that they sought on the board, or it was cited in a director biography, and that was up 4%. I'll just make a quick note here. The SEC, in their regulation, decided not to mandate cybersecurity expertise as a part of board disclosure. So that's an interesting development, but still a lot of organizations like to disclose, a board member's background in IT or background in cyber as further evidence, of their ability to oversee this risk. 74% provided insights into management reporting to the board, or committees that oversee cybersecurity matters. That was up significantly, 13%. 68% included language on the frequency of management reporting to the board, and that was up significant, 21% from the previous year. And then 39% actually disclosed the actual reporting frequency of management. So whether they were reporting on an annual basis or a quarterly basis or something like that. And again, sharing all this because as you consider your reports, I think it's important that you look at each of these elements and consider disclosing information about each one of these, because it does help send a strong message about your culture or oversight efforts that your organization is performing. So now I want to highlight a company that is doing something particularly well and unique in the market, and that company is Equifax. Of course, we're all aware of the Equifax story, major incident in 2017 that certainly created a lot of distrust in the market. And I'm sharing this because I think that we can probably learn a lot from the Equifax approach, and also to understand how their stakeholders have responded to their approach. And so how does a company like Equifax create trust around cybersecurity after a major incident? Well, for those of you who have been following this, you know that Equifax has really doubled down on being very transparent about their approach to cybersecurity and the program that they've created. According to their CEO, when he joined the company in 2018, he made a personal commitment to establish Equifax as an industry leader in cybersecurity. And he says, and I'm quoting here, "Transparency has been critical to the growth and strength of our security program. We believe that more communication, more collaboration, more transparency equals stronger cybersecurity. And one of the ways that Equifax does this transparency is through an annual cybersecurity report. Through this report, Equifax shares best practices that they've gained. They use the report to engage with customers, with policymakers, with other businesses regarding the challenges and opportunities in cybersecurity over the course of the previous year. And, the reality is that they've created a disclosure report, as you're about to see, that external stakeholders, including their shareholders, find extremely compelling. And I think there are 5 reasons why stakeholders and shareholders love this report. First, it's CEO driven. The CEO's name is all over this report, which communicates to the market that this is a company whose leadership takes cybersecurity seriously. Secondly, it's written for an external audience. In this case, it's for investors. And it doesn't use confusing language. It's not trying to use, kind of obscure terminology or tech speak. It's really meant to be digested by a non-technical audience. And that's, I think, why the investors and shareholders really appreciate this report and the Equifax approach. The third thing is it contains content and context. And what do I mean by that? I mean that it explains the cyber risk environment that Equifax faces, including some of the key security concerns, but it also includes content about how exactly they're addressing some of those issues. So whether it's supply chain issues to M&A issues, it's all in here in this report about how Equifax is thinking about those challenges. And it includes all those different elements that we were just talking about from the cyber risk management and the board oversight perspective as well. The fourth thing is that it's about the present and the future. It explains what Equifax is doing now, today, but also what they're thinking about for the years ahead. And, a lot of stakeholders, they want to understand how your cybersecurity program is performing now, today, but they also want to know that you're kind of building this for the long term too, because people want to go into business with somebody who is thinking about a long term approach. It's not just something you're trying to fix today and move on to something else. And of course, we all know that's exactly the challenge in cybersecurity is we can't just build something today and leave it be. It's a constant evolving area. And finally, and maybe most importantly, this report includes metrics, a lot of metrics. We talked about this earlier. You can't just have a narrative without having some metrics that showcase your performance. And this report is chock full of critical metrics that stakeholders can really track and have confidence in. So I hope that you'll take the time to read this report. I think it's fantastic. Would also encourage you to share it with your colleagues. But what I wanted to call out here is just an example of some of the metrics that they use. So Equifax has a summary of results page that includes all the different achievements that the security team has achieved and the associated metrics with those achievements. And they list a ton of different things, from their security posture and maturity to compliance, to M&A, to risk management, to crisis management, to privacy and training and product security. And I'm including some screenshots here just so you can see the types of ways that they describe their efforts. And it's really interesting. I mean, they talk about their spending benchmark. You can see that they're spending below the industry benchmark of 10% of IT security spend, but they explain they have sort of a defensible reason why they're doing that they've optimized their approach, which is why they are actually spending less money than other organizations. They talk about the number of tabletop exercises that they do, and that's a global effort. So really interesting approach here, from Equifax on the metrics. But importantly, I think that the metrics really help validate the story that they're trying to articulate. They establish a narrative, associated with each sort of programmatic area. But ultimately, the metrics really help validate the things that they've done. And when you think about what this report would look like without evidence of performance, you can understand why their stakeholders value the approach that they've taken so much, because it provides a lot of validation. Now, arguably, the most important metric that Equifax uses is their maturity level and posture scores. The CEO talks about this metric in his opening letter, and you can tell that this is the one that they care a lot about. He says that our maturity level has exceeded all major industry benchmarks, and our posture has ranked in the top 1% of technology companies and the top 3% of financial services companies for 3 consecutive years. Now, why is that so compelling? First, it's very straightforward. You immediately get the sense for how this organization is performing, and importantly, how they are objectively performing against a broad set of industry peers. Stakeholders in particular, they don't just want to hear how your organization is doing, but they want to understand the context. How are you doing compared to the broader industry? Second, this information provides really good performance trending information. What we all know in cybersecurity, things can change on a daily basis, and that your organization needs to perform consistently day in and day out over time. And that is what Equifax is able to communicate here, that their performance is consistently strong and that we can track that over time and communicate that to you. And finally, I think that benchmarking suggests that there's some sort of independence in the analysis. And, independent data always creates greater confidence, I think, among the readers. In this case, the readers are the shareholders and external stakeholders. In this case, Equifax, relies on Bitsight to provide independent and objective performance benchmarking, and they're a strong performer, so they can really articulate this in a very compelling story. Now, look, does this report and all the metrics that underpin it, does it mean that something bad can't happen to Equifax? Of course it doesn't. But it tells the story in a transparent and clear way that Equifax is a company that is taking this risk very seriously. They're investing resources appropriately, and that they're achieving measurable risk reduction and strong outcomes. So, those are all really important things to be able to communicate. So you might be wondering, what is the reaction from the stakeholders? How did their investors react to this report? And the short story is that their investors love this report. Glass Lewis is one of the world's leading proxy advisory firms, which is a firm that makes recommendations to shareholders about how to vote during annual meetings. And that includes advice to like global pension funds and others who have millions and millions of shares. And when asked about the Equifax security annual report, they said that this transparency around the Equifax cybersecurity program is quite unique and remarkable. So that's great feedback from the investor community about the impact that this kind of report can have. And I think it's great validation that all of the efforts that Equifax is undertaking is working, and they are telling a very compelling story. And, when you think about the specific data, the metrics that are included in the report, they're getting great responses from their shareholders as well. So Jason Mortimer, who is the head of sustainable investment at Nomura Securities, said this about the data included in the Equifax report. We're investing in thousands of companies, and when we see objective cyber indicators, that is very decision relevant information. If I see 2 companies, one has an amazing report, shows that this is a strategic issue, and they're investing resources, you can tell which one we're going to allocate resources to. So again, this is really great validation from their investors that they find this approach to be really compelling. And I just think that's 2 really great examples of how investors and shareholders find and view this kind of information. So at Bitsight, that's what we're trying to help you do. We want you to be able to tell a compelling story to the marketplace We know that independent objective data is the best way to help you tell that story, and that's our approach. We create cybersecurity ratings and analytics, and we summarize billions of different data points into these metrics and measurements that are used by companies, by insurers, by investors, by government agencies. And our cybersecurity analytics, like the benchmarking data that we talked about today, they're becoming essential tools to communicate your cybersecurity story to your stakeholders, whether they're investors, insurers, shareholders, business partners, etc. Now, we have a lot of different capabilities that are going to be useful to help you proactively report information about your cybersecurity program. It all starts with the analytic that we're most known for, which is the Bitsight security rating. That's the rating that is used around the world by companies, by investors, by governments, by regulators, and by insurers. We create Bitsight ratings through a non-intrusive data collection about your organization that allows us to measure your program over time. And we provide you with this data that helps you understand how your program is performing. And we're looking across a variety of different critical areas like patching, endpoint detection, asset exposure, and others. And that rating is a performance indicator that reflects your performance, your organization's performance, but it can also show historical performance and historical developments over time. So ultimately, many organizations are using this information collected by Bitsight to understand their own performance, but also to compare themselves to their peers and their industry through our benchmarking and our peer analytics capabilities. So, this is a great capability. We're collecting data on millions of different organizations across every sector and industry, across every size of organization. And we're able to show you a benchmark of your organization compared to however many organizations you want to compare yourself to, whether it's dozens or thousands or even tens of thousands of organizations in your sector and industry. There are really so many ways that our customers are using this data. They want to be able to show information internally, with the CEO, with the board, in order to show gaps or to show strength of program performance, to get additional funding, et cetera. They want to be able to leverage that data in their communications also with external stakeholders. This is exactly what Equifax and others are doing. So leveraging, this independent benchmarking can really help your program in an objective way, and it puts it into context that the market really values. And the reason why so many organizations are using the Bitsight ratings and the benchmarking is because the ratings are meaningful in understanding the likelihood of experiencing an incident. So we've published a lot of different research reports over the years that show the correlation between these ratings and the likelihood of incident. One of the recent studies that we published was from Marsh McLennan's Cyber Risk Analytics Center. Marsh McLennan is the world's largest insurance broker, and they independently analyzed the Bitsight analytics, and they compared them against their massive data breach incident repository, and they found that 14 of Bitsight's analytics, which includes a security rating and a bunch of the other analytics that we create, are significantly correlated with cyber incidents, which means that poor performance in a variety of different areas can increase an organization's risk of experiencing an incident. So, being able to leverage this kind of data and compare yourself to your peers in a meaningful way is exactly why so many organizations are using Bitsight today. So, the bottom line is we're here to help you navigate this new era of cyber transparency. We're here to help you tell your story, whether it is communicating to investors, insurers, or even up to your own CEO and board. Today, more than 100 organizations actually cite their Bitsight ratings and benchmarking data in their public filings. And that number continues to grow by the day. They're publishing information about their Bitsight rating on their website. They're using what we call a Bitsight badge, which enables third parties to view their performance. And one of the reasons why so many companies are using Bitsight in their public disclosures is because the same data that shareholders and investors and stakeholders are using the Bitsight data as well. And so to be able to communicate with, Glass Lewis or Moody's or other organizations like that is a hugely effective way to tell your story. So I'm going to wrap up, and I just want to say thank you for tuning in. And remember, this is a time when telling your organization's cybersecurity story is more important than ever. Telling that story with objective, independent data is a great way of, creating trust in your program and in your leadership. And so now's the time. We're here to help, and I'll pause there. And I want to thank you for listening.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much, Jake, for being here, for sharing that insights with us. I mean, as we can all appreciate, cybersecurity is a very important and increasingly important topic in today's world. And we can't it's almost like we can't do enough to protect ourselves, right? And I really appreciate that you talked about telling your story, because I think that's so important. In at least from my background, where I come from, it's our story that builds trust with each other, right? And so being able to tell your company's story well, I think, is the most important part. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. So thank you again for joining us and sharing all that. And thank you everyone else who's tuned in and participated with us today. We hope you got something out of this, and hope we can learn something from here in the future. Don't forget, you can always reach out to Jake at Bitsight and connect with them further if you have other questions or you're interested about anything else that they can offer for you. And so I'll say thanks again to everyone. We really appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks all.
Thank you.